Chapter 5, Adelaide 1. The first big leg of our trip was done. We had made it from Melbourne to Adelaide. On a map of Australia, this journey looked tiny, but we could have traversed through Germany. We had travelled 1,000 kilometers as the crow flies, and had driven 1,500 kilometers. I thought that was a lot, but for Australians or Americans or Canadians or anyone living in a huge country, it was probably a joke. Tobias and Leo had to return their hired car, so we all had to carry our huge backpacks plus little backpacks plus everything that wouldn't fit into either through Adelaide to find a backpacker for the night. Because everything was too heavy and cumbersome to carry for a long time, we checked into the first backpacker we came across. It was housed over an Irish pub, pretty much in the middle of the city. The location was fabulous. The backpacker wasn't. It was as dirty as I had ever seen a place, and we were paranoid we'd catch a deadly disease. The place was fully carpeted, even the bathrooms. I was sure if someone took a swab from that carpet, they would be able to find and study long extinct epidemics. What must have been a beige carpet at one time was now brown. One could only guess the original color because in the corner of the rooms it still showed through. The showers had a brown, crusty stain, the kitchen was full of bugs, and the bed sheets had stains similar in color to those in the shower. We just unloaded our stuff and headed out. We wanted to walk to the beach, which looked feasible according to Tobias and Leo's map. 2 hours later, we finally arrived at the Pacific Ocean. My feet were hurting and I could only concentrate on that pain instead of the vast and beautiful view. The shoes we had bought in Germany were too small. They came from this fancy, super special outdoor shop, the same place we bought our important backpack bags. The clerks made me walk on a treadmill, adding weights to simulate a heavy backpack. The shoes were perfect, they said, and certainly felt it for those 10 minutes on the treadmill. Yet here, after 2 hours of walking, they felt quite different. I hadn't felt it in the Grampians, but now I assumed that with the rising temperatures my feet swelled while walking, making the shoes too small. Needless to say, we went back by bus. In the evening, we had our first warm meal in Australia. It was a kebab at a nice little Turkish place on a corner. I was surprised that we hadn't eaten a warm meal sooner. I guess it was because first we had no money and then we were simply too busy. The next morning we checked out of the filthy, infested backpacker before we became contaminated with pests. Tobias and Leo went by train to Alice Springs, the red heart of Australia. They only had 6 weeks to see as much as possible of this country before work called them back to Germany. Both were visibly worried about leaving Mum and me alone and departed with heavy hearts, wondering if we would even make it one day without them. At heart they were true knights, and we had been their damsels in distress. They didn't even want to take our money for fuel. We thought the least we could do was chip in with some dollars so Leo would get to eat the kangaroo steak he had been fantasizing about. But they determinedly told us they would have been driving anyway and were happy to have met us and taken us along. After a 10-minute discussion, we gave up and they left. I missed them for 5 minutes, then felt liberated. Because as nice as it is to have a knight in shining armor, it also restricts you from being your own hero. I do not particularly like heroes. Libertines appeal a lot more to me. Not the really bad kind, but more the clumsy but insanely witty pirates like Jack Sparrow. The clumsy part I have down to a T, the witty bit is lacking. Something to aspire to. Anyhow, the chances for boundless adventures grew with the departure of our knights. Mum and I went to find a new place to stay in Adelaide, one where you wouldn't come out of the shower more dirty than when you clambered in. We found the Bracken Inn, a small backpacker, also part of an Irish pub. But it was brand new and spanking clean. It had only 6 rooms and within half a day you got to know everyone who lived in it. It felt more like a college dorm than a backpacker. The rest of the day was spent at a leisurely pace. We visited all the free sites Adelaide had to offer, which were pretty much like those in Melbourne. There was a Parliament building, but it said South Australia instead of Victoria. There was the State Library, the university, and the gallery. My theory that all cities are the same was confirmed. The only differences were living conditions such as climate and setting. Adelaide, even though a city, was more like a provincial town, surrounded by a lot of nothingness. Compared to Melbourne, it was a lot less hectic and did not take itself too seriously. From the other residents at the Bracken Inn, I learned that I had to get a tax file number as well as a bank account to find any work. I had put out feelers to see what jobs were out there because I wanted to earn some money before I would run out of the little I had. But job hunting meant more phone calls, and I dreaded those. Even though I got better at talking face to face, making a phone call was still almost impossible. I could not see the other person's lip moving, so guessing what they were saying was futile. Instead, I decided to spend the day wandering around Adelaide. It was November, almost summer. The rising temperatures seemed strange to me because the first Christmas trees and decorations on houses, malls, and streets began appearing. There were reindeer and Santa Clauses sitting in blooming front gardens, and hearing jingle bells blasting out of speakers at the mall was curious. I knew my gran would start baking her Christmas cookies any day now, and thinking about her Christmas menu, which in the end stayed the same every year. All this was so outlandish and out of Mum's comfort zone that she already thought about booking her return flight to Germany. She could not find pleasure without a place of her own, living out of a backpack, never knowing what the next day would bring. Not having a home was the worst for her. When I was younger, we moved so much that it left me with an always wandering heart. With a heart like that, home is everywhere. It left my mum with a yearning heart instead. I was hoping she would stay a little longer. She didn't have anything to go back to, and I wanted her to have a memorable time. But everyone makes their own luck, and I had no influence on my mother's thoughts. She had her own battles to fight, and fight she would. She had always been a warrior, and a bloody good one at that. I simply could not force my dream onto her. She would not make this journey her own. That much was clear to both of us. It was just a matter of time before she would have enough. Meanwhile, I called the Australian Harvest Hotline to see if there were any farms out there that would employ illegal workers such as my mum. Perhaps a job would make her feel better, I thought. What was I thinking to discuss such delicate matters on a national hotline? Even if some farms did, they would hardly advertise it. Needless to say, this call was fruitless and rather ridiculous. Are you taking on illegal workers at all? Excuse me? Yet, I had made an English phone call and was pretty sure I understood at least 65% of what was being said. That was elating. After a few days at the Bracken Inn, we did something memorable. We used the inn's washing machine. The feeling that this was just a holiday was over, finished off by doing such an everyday task as washing clothes. Wiping away the holiday feeling was memorable, but so was the washing machine. Germans are used to fancy, indestructible, front-loading, high-tech washing machines that would not only survive the Third World War, but also send your laundry through a billion different wash cycles with temperatures ranging from boiling to cold depending on fabric type and soil levels. The Australian washing machine looked more like a flimsy kitchen mixer of dubious quality. You had to load it from the top, and your washing was just stirred around a bit. We put our coin in, nevertheless, and emptied our little packet of washing powder into the same compartment with our laundry, since it was the only one. The thing literally looked like a big pot with a dough mixing paddle in the middle. We shut the lid and flicked the on switch. There were no programs, wash cycles, or temperatures. I was sure the washing would not come out clean, but hoped for a better smell at least. Next door to the laundry was the kitchen, so we decided to have breakfast while the washing machine groaned and rattled forbiddingly. The kitchen was small and the dining table just stood against the wall in the wide hallway that served as a common room. From the table you had a view into the kitchen, could see the doors to the bathrooms and the smaller hallway toward the bedrooms and front entrance. We could also see the foam lifting the lid of the washing machine and working its way to the floor. But the wash cycle was over and a larger disaster was prevented. We took out the washing. Not only was it wet, but it was full of blue fluff. We had treated ourselves to new light blue towels with hippopotamus appliques because the fancy high-tech, paper-thin and space-saving travel towels from the same shop we had bought the backpack bags and the ill-fitting shoes did not dry anything. They really did not deserve the name towel and were one more utterly useless item we had paid too much money for. The hippopotamus towels had been the cheapest in the shop, but they were so fluffy and soft and comforting. They dried and made me happy. Of course, they took off a lot of space in the already way too full backpacks, but we had to have a bit of luxury. On closer inspection, all our washing now had a light blue tint as well. Nothing could be done about that, so we put everything into the dryer that did not sound much better than the washing machine and got so hot that it was sure any last dirt particles would simply be burned off the clothing. It did dry though. After that, we went walking in the city with our light blue clothes. Everything in Adelaide is built in square blocks like a Roman military operation. No chance of getting lost, which is a pity. Getting lost in a new city is the best thing ever. Life was very different in Australia. Here, everyone you passed in the street greeted you in some way or another. A nod, a hello, a smile. There was always some sort of friendly acknowledgement, even though no one knew you. In Germany, everyone knows you, yet no one greets you. People try to ignore each other and pretend not to have seen you. I liked the Australian way much better. One could start a conversation at the grocery store over a package of pasta with a complete stranger and think you had a lifelong friend. Which of course was never the case, as I had to find out. So the one big advantage about being in Germany instead with conservative closed-up Germans was that it was clear if you had made a friend, because no one bothers talking to non-friends. I managed to apply for a tax file number and open up a bank account. The tax file number would be sent in 3 weeks and the bank card within a week. Because I had found out that the post office would store your mail until you picked it up, I ordered everything to be sent to the main post office in Adelaide. It was like having a post box, but free. The trouble with that was, I hadn't planned to stay at the same place for that long. Mum and I decided to go to the park and make a plan. Instead of planning, we manicured our nails with Mum's newly purchased scissors, files and polishes, leaving nail clippings in the park, so there's literally a piece of us left on a lawn in Adelaide. Doing her nails made Mum somewhat happy, or at least soothed her. Now that our nails looked awesome, we went to the mall. The David Jones Mall in Adelaide was nothing much from the outside. It looked like a beautiful but small Victorian-style townhouse from the outside, but when you stepped in, you realized the mall had been built behind the facade of an entire row of townhouses, and it was enormous. Everything was gilded and looked so fancy we felt out of place in our light blue-tinted clothes. In the middle of the huge space was an atrium that went up for many floors. The atrium was topped by a glass dome that looked glorious and flooded the entire mall with light. It was beautiful. On the lowest floor of the mall was the food court. There were so many options to choose from. You could eat your way from Japan to Italy, over to Spain and then India, have Mexican or Australian fare, then top it all with delicious ice cream, while sitting under the fancy glass roof. All these little restaurants were arranged in a circle around the atrium. Tables stood in the middle of the circle that offered the fantastic smelling fares from around the world. The tables did not belong to one particular restaurant, so the burger could sit with the sushi and Thai noodles with the pizza. Equality, it was possible at the food court. We purchased an ice cream by Baskin & Robbins. Chain or not, it was glorious. The aroma of chocolate and tiny cookie bites exploded in my mouth, and it was well worth the $2 we spent. My taste buds were celebrating. Back at the Brecken Inn, Mum disappeared into the closest phone box to quench her thirst for Germany. Shortly after, I did the same. At times I missed Alex, most of all when I rang him, so it was a little like self-torture to do so. Under no circumstances would I go back to Germany, so why I did this to myself was unclear. The days were flying by, and even though we were tired to find work, even though we tried to find work, we remained unemployed. As fast as the days were going by, our money was running through our fingers. Soon we would be penniless again. I should have listened to my former boss and my forever friend Felix and brought a laptop with me. Adelaide was full of really bad print products, and people could use a traveling graphic designer like me. No one would employ Mum without a permit. Her frustration and homesickness grew. We both knew she was holding me back. Soon, I would have to move on without her. During these last fleeting days together, we explored Adelaide and its surrounding areas. We almost felt like natives who knew our way around the city. There was a big market hall near the center where the freshest and cheapest fruits and vegetables could be found. But to save our money, we mainly lived on pasta with butter and the occasional onion. We would die of scurvy if we continued like that. Now and then we'd indulge in a fried chicken or a burger from the Brecken Inn pub. They were famous and deserved to be for the two dishes. At the Central Market, there was a German Mettwurst shop. We found a Weimar theater and the computer shop called Berlin Wall. The whole city was full of German names. As we found out later, Adelaide was founded by Germans. There was even a German museum village type thing somewhere near Adelaide, but we refused to visit it. On a Friday, we decided we had to move on. If Mum had to head back to Germany soon, we should at least see the Outback, the famous Australian Red Centre. One could not leave Australia without visiting that. I would have loved to have gotten a car at this point, but driving on the wrong side, horror stories about missing tourists in the Outback and all that held me back. So we decided to go on a bus. We booked a tour bus that would drive us past everything we wanted to see. It was the cheapest we could find, of course. We had to wait 5 more days before we would depart, and Adelaide had an amazing parting gift for us. It was the time of the annual Christmas pageant. That was something we had never seen before. In Germany, you could compare it to the carnival processions, but we do not have anything like that at Christmas. Adelaide's Christmas anticipation was celebrated by this big parade with elves, reindeers, storybook characters, and at the end of the parade, the highlight was Santa Claus. Hordes of children already lined the streets at 4 a.m. to get the best spots. Before noon, the King William Street toward the city center in front of the Brecken Inn and Victoria Square were closed. Closed and stuffed with people like a Christmas goose. There was no way to move. Around 350,000 people lined the street, of which 75% were children with sparkling eyes, waiting to see the hero of the season. The few adults had their hands full. They carried sun umbrellas and provided hats, sunscreen, boxes with cold drinks and snacks. Everything to keep their kids going from 4 a.m. through the midday heat of summery Australia. I am not sure which spectacle was more interesting to watch, the parade or the fed-up parents. I have to say, Australia has patient kids. I did not see a single meltdown, not even in the midday temperature of 95 Fahrenheit. Those kids were hardy. They sang and cheered like it was a big happy scout camp. Finally, through some speakers that had been put everywhere, especially for the day, a voice shouted, "Are you ready?" The answer was an ear-splitting shout of yes. The kids' eyes were shimmering like diamonds and their smiles were wide. The happiest faces on earth that day, that much was clear. Their cheers must have been heard in the furthest streets of Adelaide. Then a countdown was heard through the speakers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, go! Countless floats made their way through the masses. Elves, gingerbread men, ballerinas, and all sorts of colorful beings marched down the streets of Adelaide. With constant enthusiasm that never faltered, every single wagon and figure was greeted, cheered for, and sang for. It really was beautiful, the crowd and the parade. One float looked like a music box. It was round and had an open lid. In the middle was an ever-spinning ballerina who was an actual live human being dancing to Für Elise. Another float had huge angels with delicate wings that swayed in the light breeze. A carousel with wooden horses, real horses, bagpipe players, funny enough, a windmill, Mary and Joseph, and a sea of colors. Then, finally, Santa. All I felt was pity for this man in his white beard and red coat. He must have been near fainting by the end of the parade. Santa Claus might be dressed right in the red coat and beard in the northern hemisphere, but down here he could die of a heat stroke. But the kids have made it worthwhile for him. As soon as they saw him coming, the constant cheers and songs that I thought cannot be topped were topped. The crowd went wild. Wherever Santa rolled past, you could hear a numbing, jubilant scream. It was like a giant sound wave going through Adelaide. The only slightly odd thing about it was that the parade was sponsored by Credit Union, who probably wanted to give a few loans before Christmas to put some poor parents into debt. After the parade, Mum firmly decided to fly back to Germany after our outback trip. Even though I thought she was giving up too easy this time, I knew it was best for her and for me, so I didn't fight it. We celebrated her decision with rice pudding, one of my favorite childhood foods. It came in tins in Australia and tasted nothing like I had in mind. As we sat at the table in the Bracken Inn, munching our rice pudding out of a tin, a newcomer walked in. An English guy. The astonishing part was that he carried an iron. He was backpacking and carried an iron. I decided the English are mad. Little did I know I would marry an Englishman years later. Mum and I spent one last day at the Henley Beach. I have the natural color of a swamp corpse and overdid it a little. At the end of the day, I looked more like a pink flamingo. On the way home, on the only tram to town, we overheard a group of lost German retirees. Under no circumstances did I want to talk to them. I felt like being one of those on one of those promotional bus trips they do in Germany, where all the oldies get thrown on a bus and carted around from one shop to the next to spend their retirement fund on useless things like heated cup holders. First, I pretended to be dead, which is an achievement when you are flamingo colored. Then I took pity and told them where they had to go. From that moment onwards, we had to disclose details of our entire trip and existence until they got off the train. This old world-looking maroon-colored tram drove in a straight line from Adelaide city centre to Glenelg, a suburb right at the coast. Apparently, it was where the first settlers of South Australia landed. The buildings were made of stone in a style that someone had copied from England. There was a pier, there were lots of cute little shops, and there was this marvelous bakery. Germans are very particular about bakeries and baked goods in general. We are bakery snobs. But we thought this baker was good. So we bought an entire blueberry cake. It was oval and as long as my forearm. We sat on the pier of Glenelg and ate the entire cake. It was scrumptious. That night, we had a photo safari through Adelaide to say goodbye to our staging post. To our delight, we found a traveling snack shack that filled the streets with the smell of hot, fat French fries. We gave into this heavenly scent and shared glorious, thick, long, salty fries. In town, we bought ridiculous straw hats, thinking they'd protect us from the heat during our upcoming travels through the outback. They were only $3. With sunglasses for an additional $2, our idiotic look was perfect. But I didn't feel the least bit embarrassed. I invested another $5 in postcards and stamps to entertain the people back home. On our way to a museum we wanted to visit, we met a remarkable old gentleman named Ronald. Out of the blue, he started talking to us and invited us to coffee at the Hilton Hotel Cafe. I have no idea why he invited us, and I wondered how many strangers he invites per day. I just know I will never forget Ronald, a kind stranger. There are more kind strangers around than unkind ones. He was my living proof. We sat in this glamorous coffee place, blue-tinted clothes and all, with this lovely man, and he told us about his wonderful wife. They had been married for 60 years, and we wondered how old he might be. Ronald told us he traveled the world in his youth and visited Germany 3 times. He told us about being kind even to strangers, and that a little help often goes a long way. He talked about his kids and grandkids, about his Adelaide. He had lived here all his life. Then he asked us if we had enough money and offered us $10, just like that. Needless to say, we did not take the money. We were touched by this gesture, though. At this moment, I decided that I would always give when I could, because Ronald was right. As we parted ways, Ronald told us he'd go shopping now. He always did that while his wife volunteered at the maternity ward of the hospital. "That was my 3rd coffee this morning," he said as he left us, and unknowingly answered my question from earlier.